to book club day. I read this book. It's the T-Slur is the title of the book. Confessions of Punk Rock's Most Infamous Anarchist Sellout by Laura Jane Grace, who is the frontwoman for the band Against Me. They're a punk rock band. She is a trans woman, hence the title of this book. I'm not saying the title because I know that word can be pretty triggering for a lot of people. It is a word she has chosen to use, and that is fine because it's her word for herself. So just know that. I'm gonna try really hard to not say the title of this book for that reason. But I did want to talk to you about it because I said I wanted to discuss pop culture, and I know I've mentioned it before that when I read things that dealt with being non-binary or genderqueer or trans, I would let you know about it. So, first things first, some content warnings for the book itself. This is a punk rock and roll memoir type book. If you have ever read any of those, you probably already know that a big narrative part of those stories is a lot of drug and alcohol use. A lot, some might say a lot of drug and alcohol abuse. It's a big part of this book, so huge content warning for that if for any reason that is an issue for you or just something you don't care to read about, or if you've read other like rock and roll biography memoirs and you hate them, you're gonna hate this. Other content warnings would be a couple mentions of death and a couple mentions of suicide ideation, pretty minor in the scheme of things, but this is someone's real life story. It's about real life things that happen. So, as I said, she is a trans woman for the band Against Me. If you're not familiar with them, you can stream their music on Spotify and Amazon Music. Those are the only two I thought to check before I made this video. Check them out. They have an album that's actually titled Transgender Dysphoria Blues. Like, that's the title of an album that exists. The words transgender and dysphoria in the title of the album, and a song, I'm pretty sure, on there. So check them out. They are like punk rock, a bit like on the alternative-y side, I guess, I think, but whatever. If you hate punk rock, you will probably not care for them, but it's pretty amazing that band exists and can sing about things like this. So let's get into the meat of the book. This really is a rock and roll story. It talks about her life as a child, how she kind of fell into punk rock as someplace where she felt accepted. She wasn't out for like the bulk of this book. She was not out. So gets into punk rock, starts this band Against Me in the early 2000s, maybe 2000, 2001. I did not do like any real research before I made this video, so feel free to fact check that, but that's the general time frame. Throughout the book, her dysphoria will come up. She will talk about how she sometimes addresses it, a lot more times shoves it down, which if you are a person who deals with dysphoria, you know how well that works. Sometimes you can shove it down temporarily, sometimes for years, but eventually it's gonna like manifest and come back. So that's what she deals with for a lot of this. Some people may say that the excessive drug and alcohol use is tied into that. Seems likely. She doesn't specifically say that, however. She talks about general unhappiness a lot, frustrations with, you know, making her decisions to like move her band forward, also kind of isolates them from like the punk rock scene because they're no longer viewed as like true punk rock do-it-yourselfers, that kind of thing. So pretty common, really, like rock narrative stuff. The bigger you make it, the more like, I don't know, people like to see people fail, and I don't get that whatsoever. If you like a band, why wouldn't you want them to be successful? But whatever. So a lot of the book is about that. Probably the first 200 to 250 pages are really about the band, about a lot of ups and downs, mostly downs, to be quite honest. Like this person has not had the easiest of lives by any means. And so like I said, the dysphoria kind of comes up and then it goes away. It comes up and goes away. And it's a very minimal part of the majority of this book until you get about 200, 250 pages in. That is around 2011, 2012 when she really comes out to herself like and embraces who she is a bit more, and also decides like for herself that she's got to transition. So for me, that's when it got really interesting. Not that the rest wasn't, but like the rest was, it is a rock story. Some other rock stars make minor appearances. Joe Jett says something really awesome because she's awesome. And so she like, you know, talks a little bit about her transition process, coming out to people close to her. She, it's kind of a spoiler alert, but not really. Rolling Stone did a piece on her when she came out, which at this point was several years ago, which is why I'm like, it's not exactly a spoiler alert. That's how she came out to a lot of people. Like, she told her bandmates and some other people close to her but most of the people in her life found out via Rolling Stone that she was trans. She talks about the difficulty she had getting a therapist to, well, she had like 2 therapist choices, like that was it. Difficulty she had getting them to write her a letter for HRT, the difficulty she had with the endo, the difficulty she had with the pharmacist, and you're thinking, wow, this wasn't really 2012. That wasn't that long ago. You would expect someone with a bit of like notoriety and fame, and not a ton of money, but like access to things to have better access to trans healthcare, and she really didn't. And that just speaks to a large issue, because if someone like that can't access good healthcare, how is like a regular person supposed to access healthcare for trans issues? Like, it's really difficult. And so I found that pretty interesting, and she talks about it, but not super in depth. And it kind of like, and it might be too just because that was the more unique part of her story. So like the end of the book flew by. If you do read it, read the epilogue. That was one of the best parts, I thought. I really wanted her to talk more about how, and she does a little bit, but like how she came out, how like even being on stage was better for her because she was herself. But she also does talk about some struggles she had mentally, emotionally, physically when she first went on HRT. Decision, like when she rethought, like she kind of second guessed herself, like maybe this is gonna be too hard and I don't want to go through with it. It would just be easier for my family and my band and everyone around me if I didn't transition. So she does talk about that very honestly, but not as in depth as I would have liked. I feel like that was what was missing from the book, was like, I don't know, more trans, less drugs and rock and roll, like was what I would have liked out of the book. But overall it was a good read. She's a trans woman. I think it's really good to read diverse stories. Punk rock is notoriously kind of run by this like white male aggression, which is interesting because like not everyone into punk rock or that plays punk rock is white male, cis, straight. But that's the demographic that has kind of taken it over. So kind of her struggle with what that was like to deal with in that environment, like how are people gonna view a trans woman, like are they gonna take her seriously as a musician anymore, like that kind of stuff. So again, diverse stories are important. This is the book, Laura Jane Grace, if you want to look it up by the author, if you're having a hard time with the title. And again, like that's fine. This word is used in the book just a couple times by her for herself. She never describes a time that someone else is calling her that. Not to say that hasn't happened to her, but it's not in the book. There are some large excerpts in the book that look like they're taken like verbatim from her journals, where the rest of it's kind of like probably from her journals, but narrative. There are also a lot of like, there's a selection of photos, and there are no like current photos with her as her real self, which I thought was interesting and a weird choice. Book came out in 2016, so it's a year and a half-ish old. I think it came out in mid-2016. I'd been wanting to read it for a while. What else did I want to tell you about this book? Read it. I didn't research anything, but I'm pretty sure that I read or heard or somehow acquired, like, I feel like she is sober now, and I don't know if that's 100% true, but I think it is, and I don't know why. So if that's like an issue for you, look into that, because that I think is the case. She did just do a really awesome like celebration of gender program at a library, like a local library. She's doing good things, and I wish she would have talked about that. And again, maybe the book was written before those things happened. In the scheme of things, she's only been out a few years, and so I feel like this was probably written up to that point. And like, to me, the interesting stuff is like how great and how much has your life changed for the better now that you've transitioned, and that's such a small part of the book. But if you also feel like you want to relate to people that are really struggling with gender, this is the book for you. It was, I think it's always interesting to hear people's stories and to know that like everyone's story is unique. I thought it was interesting. She's much closer in age to me than, like, I kind of know this demographic of trans women who are a bit older than me, like older Gen X, or even a couple that are young baby boomers. And their stories very much are they kind of knew their whole lives. They really, got married, had kids, tried very hard to ignore being trans, finally had to transition, they had to do it, and had different success levels as far as like staying married or family acceptance. And I feel like Laura Jane Grace's narrative is very similar to that, which I also thought was interesting because of her age, because she's younger and a different generation. And again, because you would think by 2012, in major cities at least, that the healthcare situation and the understanding and the knowledge of doctors and therapists would be better than it was for her. But it wasn't. So that is concerning, but it just tells us there's always more work to do. I'm glad she put this out in the universe. Check out her band. If you have recommendations for like other things you want me to read and talk about, I would love to do that. I love to read. I actually have time to read again in my life, which is fantastic. Or movies to watch, or whatever pop culture-y kind of stuff you want me to talk about. If you have any like fun facts about the band or Laura Jane Grace, if you're a fan of them also, feel free to leave it in the comments. Have a great day. I'll talk to you again soon.